I think my preferred solution is to wake up and find this all be a dream.
In this episode, we talk about Brexit and how it impacts scientists and the scientific endeavor. For this purpose, Bart, my co-host, and I have invited scientists from both sides of the canal to talk about their personal experience and insights. As a quick disclaimer, yes, this episode is substantially longer than you're used to. This is because while the podcast usually focuses on the scientific endeavor, our guests clearly wanted to talk more about the politics and their personal situation and feelings about Brexit. When editing this episode, I wanted this to be reflected as well, so I decided to give these parts more space. You can listen to the full conversation on Patreon, www.patreon.com/sci4progress, where it is available for patrons. And as always, you can read the summary in the show notes on our website, www.scienceforprogress.eu. My name is Dennis Eckmeyer, and you're listening to episode 24 of the Science for Societal Progress podcast. Let me start with a quick intro. The EU is a union of sovereign countries that came together to orchestrate laws and regulations. The declared goal is to promote peace, to offer freedom, security, and justice, to create sustainable development, to combat social exclusion and discrimination, enhance cohesion and solidarity among member states, to respect cultural diversity, to establish an economic and monetary union, and most important for us today, to promote scientific and technological progress. In order to achieve all these goals, the European Union has established several institutions that I'm not going into here. The most important thing for us are the research programs that are renewed every 7 years. For the current one, Horizon 2020, the EU spent nearly 80 billion euros that are provided by the member states. And the money goes into the funding and promotion of research across the European Union. And the second extremely important part of the EU for science is the Schengen Agreement. It allows citizens of the member states to freely travel, work and live anywhere within the Schengen area. In 2016, the citizens of the UK voted in a referendum to leave the European Union. This means that all of these benefits from 40 years of pan-European negotiations are lost and have to be negotiated anew. What are the consequences for science in the UK and in the rest of the European Union?
Hi, so I'm Andy Phillipides. I'm Professor of Biorobotics at the University of Sussex.
Andrew is a UK citizen working in the UK.
Yeah, hi, I'm Thomas Nowotny and I'm a Professor of Informatics at the University of Sussex as well.
Thomas is a German citizen working in the UK.
I'm a PhD student, originally from Britain.
This is Clare Hancock.
Now getting my PhD here in Göttingen in Germany. 2.5 years in at the moment.
Clare unfortunately joined us late in the conversation because of technical issues. And with us, of course, is Bart.
As always.
Hello, Bart.
Hello. I'm for once not tired while we record this podcast.
Because we're recording an hour earlier?
And I'm at the moment at the Technical University of Munich playing with rattlesnakes. So that's
nice.
Fun all day long.
That's great fun.
Yeah, they're like the most aggressive animals I've ever seen. No shit. If you come close to their cages, they don't pretend. They really, really hate you and want to kill you.
That's good. That's nice.
Well, that's what the cage is for, isn't it?
Yeah. So, like my host, Tobias Kohl, who is a postdoc here and is interested in the infrared sensing of snakes, told me not to play with my hand too close to one of the grids because he wouldn't know if the snakes can actually go through there. And I can really say my heart stopped in that second. It was the biggest laugh for him in like the whole day. Like I nearly pissed myself. Like they can do what?
Yeah. Good Lord.
Yeah, but it's great fun. Like the animals are super scary, but quite beautiful, and their behavior is enormously interesting. Anyhow, back to the Brexit.
Where shall we start? Where shall we start?
Yeah, so maybe we just start with the official things. European Union grants. Are you on European Union grants? What will change when those go away?
So maybe I can start. We are part of the Human Brain Project. So that's the big 1 billion flagship that promised to build technology around simulating human brains. And very concretely, I don't know what's going to happen with that funding. There's been all this talk about underwriting existing commitments and so on, and I think that will happen. So if there was a Brexit tomorrow, then the Treasury of the United Kingdom would pay the money for the existing grants. But there is also a new funding phase from 2020, and I fully expect that that wouldn't be part of that underwriting. And so we have no idea whether we can participate or not. Just to give a perspective, maybe, what it means. Currently, we have one postdoc on this and are actively involved in the whole project. And that person, I guess, would have to go. Unless there is some sort of other arrangement where we can still participate. Yeah.
How much of your total funding would come out of the EU funding block?
Yeah, I mean, it's not been extremely huge for me personally. I mean, this is this one postdoc position that I've had for the last maybe 5 years or so, which is a nice, good amount of funding. But we have other projects with 2-3 postdocs on. So it's hard to put the direct number on. I guess it's maybe something like 20% of the current funding of the last years.
But that would be a substantial blow, wouldn't it?
Of course, yeah. And also kind of just the personal perspective that I have to say to Gary, Gary, sorry, you have to go isn't funny, right?
I was on one big EU project, which finished a few years ago now, and I haven't had much since. I think it's going to be much more significant for those people who've got the fellowships, because they are buying you out for the whole of your time. And so there'll be certain people who it would be absolutely catastrophic for. For me personally, currently now it wouldn't have much of an effect, but for the department it would be terrible.
Yeah, we have people on ERC fellowships, like these big advanced grants and all of that. That would be bad.
I don't know if we do yet have clarification on whether these grants will disappear or whether there will be, as in Switzerland, the Swiss pay in and are allowed access to the funding. It seems to have been one of the least, it seems to have not been debated at all, and I think there's quite a high probability that would carry on.
Yeah, I think they've been kicking the can down the road and have always said, oh yeah, we underwrite what's happening right now and then we'll talk about it. So I don't think we really know. But it's quite possible that Andy says is right, and they will realize that it's really important. And all the science societies and organizations of universities and who not, they're all pressuring the government very hard to do it, that we have some sort of solution, like the Swiss model, for example, where we can participate in some way or another and continue this kind of success story.
Because the UK was a net gainer from the whole thing.
It's subject to the negotiation, no? We get the transition period, 2 years of negotiation, and then they will decide these issues.
For the 2-year transition, while they make the deal, I think they would underwrite the funding, because typically the funding's committed in advance anyway, so it's kind of gone.
We have to register our existing grants with the Treasury so they know what they have to pay in case there's Brexit tomorrow. So that's all set up. I have no doubts that for the 2 years transition period, everything will continue as normal. And the decisions will then be made for whatever is afterwards.
What I can imagine, which would be problematic for some people, would be that during this period or for the first few months of this period, however long, people wouldn't be allowed to go on grants. So I had a situation where we were in the process of submitting a grant, and there was something happened in Switzerland, and for a period of about 3 weeks, Swiss institutions weren't allowed to be on grants. And for us, it was really problematic, because in those 3 weeks was when we had to submit, and so we couldn't submit for that particular call. And that was just very unfortunate. But I think that the university doesn't go under at that point. If it then ended up that we didn't have access to EU money, that would be very bad for science generally getting done.
But let's also talk about psychology here. No? I mean, it's not only whether you're allowed to be on projects, are you going to be invited? And that, I think, is already played out, that now people think twice whether they want to invite a UK partner onto a European flagship or whatever, like a long-term effort, because they don't know what's going to happen. So, I mean, we can be on, and until now we can bid and we can be the leader of it and all of it. But people are getting reluctant, I feel, to include UK partners, because they say, who knows, these guys, they might drop off in the middle, and then what do we do? It's a big risk and all of that. Personally, I actually haven't had it yet that I could actually put the finger on it and say, no, I wasn't on this because people didn't want me or so. I can't actually say that has been the case, but others have reported it.
The other big issue for scientists is that our community is international. Moving between countries is encouraged as career promoting. Accordingly, and as Thomas and Claire exemplify, scientists make use of the free movement agreement within the European Union a lot. I mean, what would it mean if you can't freely travel to Europe anymore?
So there's a lot to be said about this. And I followed this quite closely, and during the referendum time, it was quite funny to see that lots of people were arguing it would all be asymmetric. You could stop people from Europe coming to the UK, but people from the UK would be able to do everything, absolutely no problem, even live in the EU and so on. So it was quite shocking to see. Now, since then, I think things have moved on a lot through many, many different stages, but the final result by now has actually been that in terms of traveling, I think the agreement's been that everyone can do everything as it was, even with a no-deal Brexit. So to travel to Germany, or Germans to come here to travel, no problem at all. And not a big surprise, they want the tourists, right? And all of that. For work, it becomes different, right? And then it becomes interesting. So everything we can tell, they want to end free movement for work purposes. And that would mean if we want to employ someone from the European Union in the UK, they would need a visa. And the other way around as well. UK people in the EU would need a visa if they want to work.
But that would be very asymmetric in a way, because even so, it would be bad for European labs to not have UK scientists in here. You lose a lot more diversity in your labs, won't you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's what they wanted, right? This is one of the goals. It's not one of the drawbacks in the minds of a Brexiteer. We obviously disagree. For us, it's a real drawback.
I think we have to be slightly careful in that we don't really understand the minds of the Brexiteers, and so people have generally been, without going to my standpoint, is people have generally been misinformed and lied to. Some people do understand and don't care because they're rich or whatever, but I don't really understand what's going on, because it's just patently, shooting yourself in the foot. But let's leave that there. But I think that, This is obviously a bad thing. And I think the universities as a whole sector have come out and said, this is obviously a bad thing. And I don't really know what we would do about it.
So for you personally, Thomas, would this change anything for you?
Well, so that there has already been an agreement, and again, this is even for a no-deal Brexit, where people who are already there can stay. And all I have to do is a little bit of bureaucracy. I have to register for settled status, something I haven't done yet, but I have to do until end of 2020. And if I do that, and involves a bit of paperwork, then everything stays the same pretty much. Actually, I wasn't completely accurate. One thing that is changing, even with the settled status and everything, is that if I leave the UK for 2 years, I can't come back.
And there has been a slightly underreported thing as well, is that whilst these things were ongoing, there are other ways that you can get, you can apply for indefinite leave to remain, you can apply for different things. And I don't know how much it's been reported, but there's been a hostile environment set up by the Home Office to essentially deter international people from registering and getting visas here. And I do know in one case of a very prominent professor who was denied his leave to remain with no right to appeal, because the photo that when he went down to the office, they picked out a photo for him, and then when he put that photo in, they said they rejected the photo and said he had no right to appeal. And he was very, very annoyed about this and was thinking of leaving because of that. And this is because there's these two things coming together. There's this kind of, they've made it really horrible for international people, and in some terrible, terrible cases that have been exposed. But this going through, I think this is really added into the issues. And Thomas, you got some. Did you go through a citizenship test?
No, I didn't do the citizenship test. What I got at the moment is I am. Now let me get the terms right. I have a certificate of permanent residency in the UK, and that's something that's a EU construct, which everyone who lives in a different EU state can apply for these certificates. And it's something you get after you've been living in one of the EU states that is not the state of your nationality for 5 years. Okay. You can get this kind of certificate. And I did that, which was a lot of paperwork actually at the time. Now it will be replaced by the settled status, which is.
And you didn't have to do any tests?
More paperwork. I didn't have to do a test for that. No, but it includes this ridiculous document where you have to enter all your absences from the UK, where you say, I flew to that conference and then I came back. And then for I think 10 years back or something, I can't remember. It was not fun.
Well, a friend of mine who's been here since the last 25 years and working in the local council and various things ever since. She did one of the tests. I can't remember which one, the lower bar test, which was just ridiculous.
Did she pass?
She did pass, just about, yeah, with questions that none of us could answer.
I've done some practice tests on the web, but I have a kind of 50% success rate.
Yeah. Anyway,
after 12 years here.
Yeah.
What is Claire's situation as a Brit in Germany?
So, I mean, as far as I understand now, I'm safe because I've got my working contract in place. I've got everything set until at least, I think, the end of 2020. My contract is still valid. But after that, I mean, it depends on my working status, I guess. If I apply for example, a postdoc in Germany, I guess it'll be a very different process in a couple of years' time than it would have been when I first came. Exactly what that means, I still don't really know. I don't think anyone really knows at the moment.
But do you know, we were just discussing that within the UK, they have this idea of this settled status. Did the Germans set something up like that? I'm actually not aware.
So I'm also not aware of anything
they did.
On the German side. Yeah?
So I think they said that at least for the period that the Brexit is still negotiated, all people that came from Britain can actually stay in Germany, and that after the negotiation, they will at least find some other solution so that you don't have to leave.
Okay.
Yeah, I also saw that there was some idea floating around. I don't know how concrete it is, but the idea that after Brexit, if you already are living in an EU country, then you have some right to remain there, but you only are allowed to stay in that country. You can't then freely move around the EU. So if you're currently living in Germany, you can stay in Germany, but you won't have the same rights if you try to go to a different European country. But I don't think that's anything that's been set in place. It's just another of these ideas that's floating around.
Yeah, I heard about that. So this is where it's then the other way around, where being 27 against 1 is a disadvantage. Because UK citizens lose all the rights in the other 26 if they happen to have settled in one of the 27.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's not ideal, is it? I mean, it was such a nice situation. When I came to UK, I kind of felt like I was moving to Europe. Okay, I should say I've worked in California before. And I'm just like, oh yeah, I'm moving back to Europe and I'm going to settle somewhere there. And it didn't really matter. And ever since this referendum, I need to actually think again completely differently of that it does matter. I can't just live in Brighton within Europe. No, I'm living in England. Yeah. So
a PhD usually doesn't end when it's supposed to end or when you planned it. How do you feel about that, Claire, if you think about like maybe needing an extension and maybe not having the funding?
I mean, in my case, so my specific funding, I think these things are already considered. So there's already a kind of clause that says I can have, so my original contract is for 3 years, for example, for the PhD. And it's already kind of assumed that you would take at least 3.5 years and maybe 4. So this is already, right. The funding is already aside for me for up to 4 years. Yeah, so in terms of that, I'm safe, but additional funding, like going to conferences, I'm not sure how that's going to work. And yeah, I mean, there's often also this extra contracted period after the PhD finishes to wrap things up, to write the manuscript. And this is also a separate contract, a separate everything. So it's dealt with a lot differently, I guess.
But can I ask you this, Claire? I mean, is it that you actually worry about these things since Brexit has happened, and that you look into it and what's the detail and how does it actually work?
I mean, for myself, I feel safe, at least in terms of staying in Germany for what I need to do. It's more like a social worry for me about, my country. And I remember when the results of the vote first came out, it was really devastating, just what it means for the country and the values of the majority of Britain is, in that way, is scary. And then, of course, now all of the logistics of these tiny things, the health insurance when you're traveling, the car insurance, the visas, the extra money that you have to pay to travel, all of these things, it seems like no one really thought about beforehand. So, yeah, the uncertainty more than anything.
Yeah, one of my worries has been that they're all talking about a bit of taxes and is it going to get more expensive? Is it going to be this? Is it going to be that? But we had the introduction at the beginning, no? And the European Union was a peace project originally and not about trade. And they completely lost that plot. Completely. There's no one's even talking about it. And I find that quite worrying and upsetting, to be honest.
Yeah, that would be the next question. So we touched on a couple of things, but in general, what are your feelings about this in general?
Personally, I was very disappointed and felt a real psychological impact in terms of feeling welcome or not. It's just a statement. Obviously, there's 48% of the people voted one way, 52% the other way, and not everyone's the same, and so on and so on. Within the university, 80% or so were for Remain. So in that perspective, it's all fine, but you still feel less welcome if there is a real reason to believe that people have voted the way they voted for Brexit because they didn't want European citizens here. Because that includes me, yeah. So I was from the beginning quite disappointed, and that has not lessened with the whole incessant discussion about this and that, and should we be bargaining chips or not, and should they be allowed to stay, and how and when and how much. That's been quite enervating and really not a happy time that way, I must say. It is a much less welcoming place, even though, again, personally, no one has said anything to me. Even though I just learned from a colleague, he's Italian, that he was shouted at in a bus in London once, like after the referendum, "We don't want you here." which definitely wasn't a good experience for him.
Yeah, that's awful.
But it's in the background, no? You kind of think about it, and you would want to live in a place where most people are okay with you being there. No, you don't want to have this underlying feeling that maybe I should move because I'm not welcome here.
Right. And I heard that a couple of times, actually, that also German people were shouted at, not just Italians or other people from... I think there's a lot of ressentiment against the Eastern countries.
That's what you hear, right, in the news.
It is so difficult. I'm sure there is, and I think there would have been a lot anyway. It is tricky because one sees it through the lens of Brexit, and whether these incidents would have happened anyway. We also see, the big march, which had an awful lot of people and was very positive. It's very tricky because it's also so regionally divided and divided on levels of education, age. It's a very depressing situation, and not least of which it exposes both the media for how easy they are able to manipulate and they are able to be manipulated, and how kind of ineffective our politicians are, both on the left and the right, really.
So I heard an interview with a German law professor, and he said that this is like one of the few examples where you can see how two different opinion-building processes actually clash. You have this uncompromising vote on the one hand, and these basically helpless politicians who have to find a compromise on an uncompromising vote.
The worst thing about this whole process was that it was, it wasn't instigated for reasons to give people a choice. It was instigated for a purely political thing, for David Cameron to get control of his party, and that's why it was such a shambolic process. And it's appalling we're in this mess, having done no governing and for the last 2 years, because of just some whim.
So, Claire, I'm pretty sure you talked with your peers in Germany about Brexit. What is your experience?
Mostly confusion. I think I and most people that I've spoken to just don't understand why we've gotten ourselves into this mess. I mean, it's like Andy was saying, I don't think David Cameron thought this was ever going to pass. I think it was a tactic on his half to just quiet what he thought was a small majority in the Tory party who wanted to leave Europe. He thought, okay, we'll have a referendum, we'll shut these people up and we'll carry on. And that it's just spiraled into all of this is ridiculous. And I struggle to find any pros. And I think especially other Europeans, it's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous concept to say, no, we can do better off without all of these other 27 countries by our sides. I think it's completely foolish.
I think that there may be one pro.
Oh, come on. Let's hear it.
But not for us. So I think that it has surely made other people's, Italy, for instance, and threats to leave have receded, right? Other people saying, yeah, we're going to leave too. And people like Greece saying, we're going to leave. Those people have gone, yeah, maybe we'll stay in because it looks like it's a real pain. And yeah, as being the test case for quite how bad it's going to be, I think that's maybe something.
Well, if you believe what the Daily Mail tells us, which, we shouldn't, but this is, they're making an example of us, right? They want to make it as bad for us as possible, those Europeans, so that then everyone else is discouraged because look at us, we're a mess. Europe is so much better.
Yeah, it's true, but then they're I mean, I think the other governments are probably looking at it. There have been certainly less noises about Greece. I think the other thing, it potentially, I would be very interested in years to come to see if it is investigated, quite how much interference there was in the referendum process. I mean, we are now at the case where at the point where the Vote Leave campaign have essentially admitted wrongdoing in electoral spending.
Absolutely. I still can't believe that after there was an investigation and they found that there was unlawful conduct on the Leave campaign side, and it still stands.
Yeah.
And I've been researching this like crazy because I just can't get my head around the fact that this is okay. But I think the reason it is because it's a referendum. If it were a general election, there are laws in place that then you can say there was fraudulent spending on one party's behalf, and so then we redo the election, it's nullified. But with a referendum, because it's not legally binding, it's advisory, so there aren't those legal practices in place if there is something like this happening. And I can't believe it for something that's so important, for such a huge decision, such a huge referendum, that there aren't processes in place to hold people accountable. It was illegal. I mean, it's baffling to me.
It is astonishing. It is astonishing.
So at least from my practical point of view, Brexit doesn't seem to be a huge success story so far.
Yeah. To say the very least.
Why don't I just stop it as like Theresa May and say like, well, we did a lot of different things, but let's say that's just an advisory referendum and we just don't do it.
Well, they have talked themselves into the situation where that's suddenly a betrayal of democracy, where you have to take it seriously because it was a vote that the people take part in. It was a big turnout, the biggest one in British history. So if we ignore that, then we're kind of damaging democracy. That's the storyline.
But would it damage British democracy?
Realistically, I don't think it would. I mean, the obvious answer is that, look, you didn't know what you were voting for. There was various different things. So all you have to do is have a confirmatory vote. And that's what people are going for, this People's Vote campaign, is that, we get told what deal it is, and then we have a vote on, do we want this deal or stay in, right? And that seems to me purely democratic. There is a line, I can't remember who was saying it, is that this is actually if there was another referendum, it would be the third vote on being in the EU, because there was also one in the 70s. So this idea that you can't have multiple votes on things is just nonsense. It is just rhetoric that is put out. I think there'll be people who will be upset, and people are upset the other way. But, I don't think it'll be anywhere near the numbers of people. And I think, I can't remember what the latest polling is, but there certainly is a majority in favour of having a second vote.
Oh, certainly.
Which is completely ignored, right?
Yes. There was also this nice petition, that had 6 million signatories.
Yeah, to revoke.
Revoke Article 50. So there are strong opinions still also on the other side, not only in the Brexiteer camp.
No, exactly.
If I can just add to what Andy said in terms of being non-democratic or destroying democracy, I don't see how, if it's only a vote that is not supposed to be binding, and if there is another vote overturning it, like another referendum, I don't see how that's not democratic.
Yeah, I agree. There doesn't seem to be anything in democracy where, and as the line goes, Theresa May has brought her vote back multiple times. Keeps asking the same question. So why can't we have another go? It should. If it is genuinely, I don't understand. If it's genuinely this thing that still the majority of people, it's not overturning the majority will of the people. If the majority will of the people have changed their minds, surely we're allowed to change our mind. If it comes out, if it comes out Brexit again, then we're still a bunch of idiots, right? But how could it be undemocratic to have a vote? Just beyond me.
How do you feel about that, Claire?
I would be definitely in favour of another referendum. I think the undermining democracy argument is